Serving in the armed forces has always been regarded as one of the highest expressions of courage, patriotism, and duty to one's nation. Yet beneath the medals and ceremonies lies a profession burdened by uncertainty, danger, and unspoken truths. And this is a truth I came to understand deeply during my years in uniform, especially in the late 1980s when I served as a young specialist in the United States Army. A time when America was officially at peace, but the shadows of past wars still loomed heavily over every base and every soldier. And for the sake of anonymity, you can call me Robert, a name that still feels distant from the man I once was. Like many who served, I entered the military believing that honor and discipline would define my experience. But unlike most, I left in 1988 carrying memories far more disturbing than physical scars. Memories that continue to haunt me decades later. Memories born during long, silent nights at Fort Campbell, an enormous military installation straddling the border between Kentucky and Tennessee. A place where wilderness dominates far more than concrete and steel, and where darkness has a way of revealing things that daylight refuses to acknowledge. The Vietnam War had ended only a decade before my enlistment, and its presence was everywhere, in training manuals, in whispered conversations, and in the reverence we showed the veterans who had survived it. Men we considered heroes and legends, while we, the next generation, waited restlessly for a war that never came, trapped in what the military called peacetime service, a phrase that sounded safe but felt hollow, because deep down we feared we were unnecessary, replaceable, forgotten. After serving from 1984 to 1988, including a short deployment to Central America, I was reassigned from Fort Bragg to the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell. A move that felt like fate pulling me back home, since I had grown up not far from the area, familiar with its forests, its hills, and the unsettling stories locals shared only after nightfall. Fort Campbell itself is massive. Nearly 165 square miles of mostly undeveloped land, a vast stretch of forests, training ranges, and forgotten structures, larger than most American cities, yet eerily empty once the sun goes down. And despite my primary role being communications, I soon found myself assigned to temporary duty with the military police, conducting night security patrols through the most isolated corners of the base, driving long stretches of dirt roads under star-filled skies, inspecting locked gates, abandoned buildings, and storage areas that seemed frozen in time. I actually welcomed these patrols because they made me feel useful again, like a real soldier instead a relic of a warless era. And being raised in the countryside, the darkness and silence felt more comforting than threatening at first, even as my fellow soldiers, especially those from big cities, feared these assignments, joking nervously about the woods while I laughed it off, unaware that those same woods would soon become the setting for the most terrifying experience of my life. Most nights were uneventful, broken only by strange but harmless encounters. Teenagers attempting graffiti, soldiers sneaking lovers to the perimeter fence, or the occasional trespasser seeking shelter. But there was one location we all dreaded, a massive fenced lot filled with rusted vehicles and storage buildings, cars, abandoned decades earlier. Many believed to belong to soldiers who had deployed to Vietnam and never returned, their vehicles left behind like silent gravestones. And it was here, during a humid June night patrol, that everything changed forever, marking the beginning of a mystery that would blur the line between reality and imagination, sanity and fear, and force me to confront a truth I was never meant to see. The fenced vehicle storage lot at Fort Campbell was a place that felt wrong even under the midday sun. A vast rectangular enclosure surrounded by 12-foot chain-link fence crowned with rusted barbed wire, enclosing dozens upon dozens of abandoned civilian cars and aging military vehicles that looked as if time itself had chosen to die there. Many of them so old their license plates dated back to the early 1970s. Their tires long since flattened and dry-rotted, their interiors reduced to dust and mold. And according to base rumors, most of those cars have belonged to soldiers deployed to Vietnam who never returned, men listed as Kia or MIA, whose families never came to reclaim what was left behind, leaving the vehicles to rot as silent witnesses to unfinished lives. The Army still used parts of the lot for long-term equipment storage, which meant military police patrols were required to inspect it every single night, and because vandals, thieves, and trespassers occasionally targeted the area, it was considered a high-risk post despite its isolation. A place filled with endless hiding spots, broken shadows, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. By June of that year, I had already worked enough night shifts to memorize every curve of the back roads and every gate on our patrol routes. Yet no amount of familiarity dulled the creeping dread that settled into my gut whenever our truck rolled alongside that particular fence, especially at night when moonlight barely penetrated the dense forest and the rows of abandoned cars inside. The lot formed jagged silhouettes like tombstones. On the night everything went wrong, I was paired with a fellow MP named Wireman, a solid and level-headed soldier who had spent enough time in uniform to know when something felt off. And as we cruised slowly past the section of the fence nearest the abandoned cars, he suddenly eased off the accelerator and said quietly that he thought he saw movement inside the lot. At first, nothing more than a shifting shadow between the vehicles, but then it moved again, fast and deliberate, forcing both of us to lean forward in our seats as our eyes strained to separate imagination from reality. There wasn't much moonlight that night, and the darkness inside the fence felt thicker than it should have been, as if it swallowed the weak beams from our headlights. And when Wireman trained the truck-mounted spotlight toward the movement, whatever was inside reacted instantly, ducking low and slipping behind the rusted cars with unnatural speed, too fast and too controlled to be an animal, yet too large to be anything else we could reasonably explain. Protocol demanded that we investigate. So while Wireman kept the spotlight sweeping back and forth, I radioed in a possible security breach, fully expecting we'd find a pair of bored teenagers or maybe a homeless trespasser. But even as I said the words into the radio, my hands felt clammy, a quiet warning sounding in the back of my mind that this situation was different. We pulled off the road at the nearest access gate, and I stepped out of the truck with my flashlight and key ring, the heavy beam of the headlights flooding the area behind me, while leaving everything ahead drowned in shadow. And as I struggled to find the correct key among dozens on the ring, I kept glancing through the fence, my flashlight shaking slightly as it cut across rows of decaying metal and darkness, each second stretching longer than the last. When the padlock finally clicked open and the chain fell away, Wireman repositioned the truck to drive inside, and I stepped through the gate ahead of him, unaware that I was about to cross an invisible line into something I would never truly escape, because in that moment, with the forest silent and the air thick and unmoving, the sense of being watched intensified so sharply it felt physical, like pressure against my chest. And before I could call out or step back, the darkness ahead seemed to gather itself, as if preparing to breathe. I had taken no more than 2 cautious steps inside the gate when the silence of the night was ripped apart by a scream so loud, so piercing, and so violently unnatural that it felt as if the sound itself had claws, tearing through the air and straight into my spine, a long shrill wail that echoed across the fenced lot and froze me mid-stride. And in all my years growing up in the countryside, hunting, camping, sleeping under open skies, I had never heard anything even remotely like it, because this was not the cry of any animal I knew, nor did it sound human, but something else entirely, something that carried raw rage and pain in equal measure. My body reacted before my mind could process what was happening, every muscle locking as the hairs on the back of my neck stood upright, my heartbeat slamming in my ears so loudly it drowned out every other sound. And for a terrifying moment, my vision began to collapse inward, the world in front of me transforming into layers of black upon black, the abandoned cars and storage buildings reduced to jagged silhouettes that seemed to stretch and warp as if the darkness itself were alive. I realized with growing panic that I was experiencing tunnel vision, my instincts screaming at me to run, while my training fought desperately to keep me grounded. And as I forced myself to breathe and take slow steps backward toward the gate, another scream erupted from a different location inside the lot. Then another, each one closer than the last. And suddenly the horrifying truth hit me with brutal clarity. There was more than one of them, My mind raced through possibilities, counting the screams, trying to calculate numbers, angles, escape routes. But logic collapsed under the sheer wrongness of the situation, because whatever was out there was coordinated, fast, and watching us, and I could feel their presence like eyes pressing against my skin. Training took over as it was designed to do in moments of extreme stress, and I jammed my key ring against the flashlight in my left hand and drew my pistol with my right, my movements sharp and automatic, while behind me Wireman exited the truck with his weapon drawn as well, his face pale in the glare of the headlights as he aimed into the darkness where the screams had originated. Before either of us could shout a warning or retreat fully, a massive shape suddenly rose from between the rusted cars ahead of us, standing upright in a way that instantly defied reason, because it was far too tall, the abandoned vehicle's barely reaching its waist, and it remained motionless for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, as if it were deciding what to do next, before lunging forward with explosive speed. The fear that hit me then was unlike anything I had ever known, a primal terror that wiped away doubt and disbelief, and both Wireman and I scrambled back into the truck, slamming the doors as Wireman cranked the wheel hard and stomped the accelerator, the tires barking as the vehicle surged forward along the narrow road running parallel to the fence. As we sped away, I glanced to my right through the open window, and my blood turned to ice, because the creature was running alongside us on the other side of the fence, no more than 10 feet away, its massive form moving with terrifying strength and efficiency, keeping pace with the truck as if it were nothing more than a slow animal. Acting on instinct, I swung my flashlight beam onto it, and what I saw burned itself into my memory forever. An enormous upright figure at least 8 feet tall, covered in short dark brown hair, with a rounded head that was unmistakably not human, a face that appeared hairless and shiny like skin, with a distinct nose and mouth that resembled no animal I could name, its body thick and powerful with wide hips and a heavy pelvis, its legs short but muscular, pumping furiously as it ran without swinging its arms, its upper body rigid and unervingly stable. I could hear it, breathing over the roar of the engine, deep guttural grunts forced from massive lungs. And worst of all, its eyes were locked on me, not the road, not the fence, but me, filled with a fury that made my stomach drop. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that we were not dealing with a misunderstanding, a prank, or a trespasser, but something far beyond anything we had been trained to face. The truck roared down the narrow service road as Wireman forced more speed from the engine, the headlights bouncing wildly over potholes and uneven ground. Yet no matter how fast we went, the pounding of massive feet kept pace beside us. The creature's presence, so close that I could feel it even without looking. And when I dared to glance again, my chest tightened in disbelief as the towering figure continued to run effortlessly along the fence line. Its movements powerful but disturbingly controlled, its stiff upper body rocking only slightly as its thick legs drove it forward with brutal efficiency. And the deeper realization struck me then that this thing was not simply chasing us in blind rage. It was matching us, studying us, choosing its moment. The sound it made as it ran, a deep, rhythmic grunting, cut through the engine noise and the hiss of tires, and the smell of hot metal and dust filled the cab as adrenaline surged through my veins, my mind screaming at me to fire my weapon, while another part of me hesitated, clinging to the faint and foolish hope that this could still somehow be explained away as a group of deranged humans or a freak of nature we didn't understand, because pulling the trigger would shatter that last fragile barrier between disbelief and irreversible truth. Wireman shouted something I couldn't hear over the chaos, his knuckles white as he wrestled the steering wheel, his eyes flicking between the road ahead and the darkness behind us. And when I swept the flashlight over the creature again, the beam revealed details I wished I could forget. The texture of its hair matted and dark with sweat, the unnatural proportions of its body, the way its eyes seemed to hold a focused intelligence rather than animal panic. And then, as if to prove just how badly outmatched we were, The creature suddenly veered toward the fence and launched itself upward with terrifying ease, its massive hands gripping the top rail as it vaulted the 12-foot barrier in a single fluid motion that defied everything I knew about physics and strength. For a split second, it seemed almost weightless, suspended against the night sky, before its body caught on the barbed wire, the metal screaming as it tore loose, and the creature crashed down on the other side in a tangled heap, rolling violently before scrambling to its feet with an enraged roar that echoed through the trees. Wireman didn't slow down, didn't look back. He just pushed the truck harder, and after several long seconds, the sound of pursuit finally faded, replaced by the pounding of my own heart and the ringing silence that follows pure terror, and we drove on in stunned quiet, neither of us daring to speak, because saying anything at all would make it real in a way we weren't ready to accept. Training and duty eventually reasserted themselves, and despite every instinct screaming at us to leave the area, we continued along our patrol route, both of us knowing without saying it that the open gate I had left behind would need to be secured before morning. A responsibility that felt like a death sentence even as the sky slowly began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. When we finally returned to the lot in daylight, pistols drawn and nerves frayed, the place looked ordinary, almost harmless, the rusted cars sitting quietly beneath the sun as if mocking our fear. Yet the damage to the fence told a different story. The barbed wire ripped down exactly where the creature had vaulted over, twisted and broken in a way no human could have managed. And standing there in the open light, I felt a sickening mix of relief and dread, because the physical evidence confirmed what we had seen, stripping away any chance that it had been a shared hallucination. Back at the station, we reported only the damaged fence and nothing more, instinctively understanding that the Army had no place for stories like ours, that soldiers who claimed to see impossible things were liabilities, not assets. And as the years passed and the memory refused to fade, I came to accept a truth more unsettling than fear itself. That whatever we encountered that night was real, intelligent, and still out there, hidden within the vast forests of Fort Campbell, watching, waiting, and forever changing the way I would see the darkness again. In the days that followed the encounter, fear did not fade as I expected it might. Instead, it settled into me like a second skin, quiet but ever-present, sharpening my awareness and poisoning even the most ordinary moments. Because while Wireman and I never spoke openly about what we had seen, the understanding between us was unmistakable, sealed in shared glances and long silences. A mutual agreement that survival depended not on bravery, but on restraint, and above all on silence. The Army is an institution built on discipline and order, one that demands soldiers be reliable, rational, and emotionally controlled, especially during peacetime when budgets shrink and excuses are sought to thin the ranks. And I knew from past experience that reporting something so extraordinary would not earn investigation or protection, but suspicion, psychiatric evaluations, and a mark on my record that could end my career overnight. So when questioned about the damaged fence, we stuck to the facts and nothing more, letting the truth rot unspoken between us. Yet every night after that, when I returned to patrol duty, the darkness felt heavier, the forest closer, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a branch sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. Because now I knew that something massive and intelligent moved through those woods, something capable of watching us without being seen, and the thought that it might recognize us, remember us, chilled me more than the encounter itself. I found myself replaying every second of that night over and over, analyzing its movements, its behavior, the way it chose to pursue rather than flee, questioning whether the screams we heard belonged to more than one creature, and whether the one that confronted us had been sent forward deliberately, a guardian or sentry testing our boundaries, and the implication of that possibility gnawed at my sanity, because it suggested a level of organization and intent far beyond animal instinct. Despite my terror, duty demanded that I continue inspecting the same junk lot every night, and each time the patrol truck slowed near that fence, my pulse spiked, my hand hovering near my weapon as my eyes scanned the shadows between the abandoned vehicles, half expecting to see that massive silhouette rise again. Yet it never did, leaving me trapped in a state of constant anticipation that felt almost worse than direct confrontation. Wireman eventually rotated off night patrols, reassigned to other duties, and though I never asked for details, his relief was obvious, and I was left alone with my thoughts, my memories, and the unshakable certainty that what we encountered had not been an isolated fluke, but part of something larger and deeply rooted in that land. Something that had been there long before Fort Campbell existed and would remain long after we were gone. Years later, long after I left the Army, I would learn that the region surrounding the base was steeped in accounts of unexplained encounters, disappearances, and strange creatures. Stories I might have dismissed as folklore had I not lived my own, and the realization that I had unknowingly stepped into a place with such a dark history only deepened my unease, because it meant the warnings had always been there, whispered through generations, ignored by those who believed concrete and barbed wire could tame the wild. Even now, decades later, the memory still visits me in the quiet hours before sleep, when the mind is most vulnerable, and I find myself wondering what would have happened if we had been slower, if the truck had stalled, or if that creature had chosen to attack rather than test. And those unanswered questions linger like ghosts, reminding me that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the military is not a rifle or a tank, but silence, the kind that buries the truth deep enough for fear to survive untouched. As time passed, and the Army moved on with its routines, promotions, inspections, and quiet peacetime drills, the questions left behind by that night refused to fade, instead growing heavier with every year that followed. Because once you witness something that shatters your understanding of the world, ignorance is no longer an option, and I found myself trapped between disbelief and certainty, replaying the encounter endlessly in my mind, searching for flaws in my own memory, yet always arriving at the same conclusion, that what Wireman and I saw was real, physical, and deliberate. Had I been alone that night, I might have convinced myself it was a stress-induced hallucination or a trick of the darkness. But shared terror carries a weight that imagination cannot replicate, and knowing another trained soldier had seen the same impossible thing stripped away any comforting doubt. I began to notice how carefully the military avoids acknowledging anything it cannot explain. How quickly unusual incidents are buried beneath paperwork and silence. And how effectively that silence protects not just careers but institutions. Because admitting that something unknown operates freely within the perimeter of a major military base would challenge the very idea of control and security that the Army is built upon. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if we were meant to see it at all, or if our patrol had simply crossed an invisible boundary at the wrong moment, interrupting something that usually remained hidden. And the thought that those creatures, whatever they were, might view us not as enemies, but as intruders unsettled me deeply, because it reframed the encounter not as an attack, but as a warning. The screams we heard echoed in my memory more vividly than the chase itself, because they carried a purpose, a message, as if meant to disorient, intimidate, and herd us away. And the fact that the creature never attempted to breach the truck or pursue us beyond the fence suggested restraint, intelligence, and choice, qualities far more frightening than blind aggression. After leaving active duty, I spent years researching similar accounts, quietly at first, then obsessively, discovering reports of massive upright creatures near military installations, national forests and restricted lands, places where human access is limited and wilderness remains largely untouched. And with each story I read, the sense of dread deepened, because the patterns were too consistent to ignore: territorial behavior, intimidation displays, pursuit without contact, and always silence from authorities. The word Bigfoot felt inadequate, almost insulting, weighed down by ridicule and pop culture mockery. Yet no other term fit, and I came to believe that the stigma surrounding it served a purpose, discouraging serious discussion and allowing real encounters to be dismissed before they could be examined, a convenient shield against uncomfortable truths. What haunted me most was not the creature's strength or size, but the look in its eyes when it ran alongside our truck, a focused awareness that suggested recognition, judgment, perhaps even curiosity, and I often wondered if it remembered us as clearly as we remembered it, if somewhere in those vast forests it still moved through the darkness, aware that it had been seen, and choosing when and if to be seen again. The older I grew, the more I understood that some answers are not meant to be found, because finding them would force us to confront how little we truly understand about the world we claim to dominate. And that realization, more than fear, stayed with me, shaping my dreams, my doubts, and my uneasy respect for the unknown that lurks just beyond the reach of light. Even now, more than 3 decades after that night at Fort Campbell, the memories remain sharper than many events that followed, untouched by time, because fear has a way of preserving moments with cruel clarity, and as I lie awake in the quiet hours before dawn, my thoughts often drift back to those dark service roads, the rusted fence, and the moment when the world I thought I understood fractured beyond repair. Leaving the Army did not bring closure, nor did distance or the passing years. Because the truth is that some experiences do not end when the uniform comes off. They simply retreat into the mind, waiting for silence to give them space to breathe. And in that silence, I have come to accept that what we encountered was not a story meant to be proven or disproven, but a lesson in humility, a reminder that even institutions built on power, surveillance, and control cannot account for everything that moves through the shadows. The term fog of war is often used to describe the confusion and uncertainty that soldiers face in combat. But I learned that the fog does not require bullets or explosions to exist. It can descend just as heavily during peacetime, when the enemy is unnamed and the threat cannot be logged, reported, or neutralized. And in those moments, the mind becomes its own battlefield, forced to choose between denial and acceptance. I have asked myself countless times what would have happened if we had reacted differently, if fear had given way to aggression, if a shot had been fired, and whether that single decision might have changed everything. But deep down, I believe restraint saved us, because whatever stood beyond that fence did not behave like a mindless beast. It behaved like something defending territory, enforcing boundaries that existed long before fences, floodlights, and patrol routes were carved into the land. What unsettles me most is not the idea that such creatures might exist, but the possibility that they have always existed, quietly adapting, avoiding us just as we unknowingly avoid truths that make us uncomfortable. And perhaps the reason so many stories like mine end in silence is not because they are false, but because acknowledging them would require us to admit how little control we truly have over the world we inhabit. I do not tell this story to convince you, because belief is not something that can be forced, and skepticism is both natural and necessary. But I tell it because carrying the truth alone is a heavier burden than sharing it. And because somewhere out there, another soldier, hiker, or traveler may find themselves standing at the edge of the unknown, questioning their own sanity, just as I once did. If that happens, I hope they remember that fear does not always mean danger. Sometimes it is simply awareness arriving too suddenly, and that survival often depends not on what we see, but on what we choose to do with what we have seen. Fort Campbell remains active, its forests still vast and largely untouched, its night roads still stretching endlessly beneath the stars, and whether those woods are empty or alive with unseen watchers is a question I will never be able to answer. But I know this. Somewhere within that darkness, beyond the reach of headlights and reason, something taught me that the greatest battles are not always fought with weapons, but with the courage to accept uncertainty, to live with unanswered questions, and to walk forward through the fog, knowing that not every truth is meant to step into the light.